your fellow Irishman, Conor McGregor, had a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And you were watching his breathing, right?
I was, yes.
Because you're into sports science. I mean,
Yes.
you spend a lot of time with athletes.
Yes.
What did you see in that fight?
I think he's a terrible breather. And you can see this, and this is how so easy it is to see. Like, look, go onto any YouTube interview where he's giving an interview to the press, not after a fight, because of course your breathing is going to be laboured after a fight. I'm looking at his breathing during rest. I'm seeing fast breathing from the chest. There's no natural pauses post-exhalation. And what that is telling me that his respiratory rate is too much. He's breathing thoracically. His breathing is entirely inefficient. His oxygen uptake is going to be reduced. His oxygen delivery is going to be reduced. He is not breathing optimally. And that's going to have an impact in sports. What are the impact? Disproportionate breathlessness, gassing out too soon, respiratory muscle fatigue, and also inadequate oxygen delivery to the muscles. Now, this is when the legs give out. And if you watch that, if you remember that fight, it's funny enough, the commentator was really on the ball. On the 8th or 9th round, he said he's really starting to mouth breathe hard.
Yeah.
And then it was a round afterwards, his legs started to go jelly. Now, here's the interesting thing. 50% of athletes are prone to respiratory muscle fatigue because the diaphragm trumps everything. The body is there to make sure that respiration is maintained because we can only last without air, for a few brief minutes. Now, if the respiratory muscles are fatiguing, blood is diverted from the legs to feed the diaphragm. And you may see an athlete and they're going hard and the next thing is their legs are going from under them. Is that due to a buildup of hydrogen ion, which also can be improved by breathing, or is it due to respiratory muscle fatigue? His legs went from under him, game over. And, here again, and I contacted the coach and I said, listen, I says...
Kavanagh.
Yes, I sent email to John Kavanagh and I said, really, you'd want to look at Conor's breathing here. No reply. And I think it's because it's only in certain cohorts. Now, in saying that, we've some Olympic athletes, we've some really high-level individuals who get this, but it hasn't happened across. I think it's the innovators now.
I'm going to email John after this because there's been a couple of London Real guests that have spent some time with Conor, and we'll try to get you in there. Great. You really think it would make a difference on his performance?
I would say without a doubt.
Wow.
There's no way that you have an athlete that's breathing. If you have poor breathing patterns, dysfunctional breathing at rest, it cannot automatically correct itself during physical exercise. It's your everyday breathing that impacts your breathing during sports. And there's so much you can do with the breath. The breath isn't just this thing that's used by hippies with the open sandals and the tree huggers. This is about performance. This is about resilience. This is about getting to the science and looking at the power of the breath. And by the way, I'm not talking about going to some instructor and the instructor is telling you to take this big breath. That's total nonsense. We're talking about the different dimensions of breathing. All too often, there's such an emphasis placed on biomechanics of breathing, breathing using your diaphragm, taking these full breaths of air into your lungs. You cannot sacrifice the biochemistry of the breath and concentrate on the biomechanics. We need to have a balance between all three. Yes, I'm all for biomechanics. The diaphragm is very important. Diaphragm is linked with your emotions. Diaphragm is linked with spinal stabilization, for posture, for movement, but also the biochemistry, which determines the release of oxygen from the red blood cells to the cells. How many times have we heard, take a deep breath, and the person takes this big breath. What's the big breath doing? It's blowing off carbon dioxide, and the loss of CO2 is causing hemoglobin to hold on to oxygen. We don't want our red blood cells holding on to oxygen. We need our red blood cells to release oxygen. How do the red blood cells release oxygen? They release it in the presence of carbon dioxide. As carbon dioxide increases, blood pH drops, and the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen reduces. This was discovered in 1904. By changing your breathing, you can open up your blood vessels, 70,000 miles of circulation. We can influence that. Just get the individual to really slow down their breath, focus on the airflow coming into the nose, focus on the airflow leaving the nose, and deliberately slow down the breathing to the point of air hunger. Air hunger tells you that carbon dioxide is increasing in the blood. And as carbon dioxide is increasing in the blood vessels dilate. But also as carbon dioxide increases in the blood, hemoglobin releases oxygen. So when we're talking about breathing, it's not about necessarily the individual who's going into this studio and you hear everybody in the room breathe. You shouldn't hear anybody breathe during rest. If they're breathing hard during rest, they're getting rid of carbon dioxide, they're causing their blood vessels to constrict, and they're impeding the release of oxygen from the red blood cells to hemoglobin. This is really where, we need to start breaking down the different dimensions. And I would hope that professionals who are teaching yoga, Pilates, counseling, that they start looking at the different aspects of the breath. Don't just concentrate on one part of the breath and sacrifice the rest.
Yeah, so the big deep breath can actually hurt you, is what you're saying.
It's not increasing oxygen uptake in the blood. It's not increasing oxygen delivery. And if you continue taking that big deep breath, you'll be stuck in that pattern of hyperventilation, chronic hyperventilation. Now, it's often hidden. And you could have an individual who is breathing fairly normal during rest, but they go and do physical exercise and they're having disproportionate breathlessness. We should be able to tolerate, a mark of a good level of fitness is an individual who can go for a run with light breathing. If you think of somebody who is very unwell, they walk and they get out of breath walking up a flight of stairs. So there is a correlation between fitness and ventilation. And people who are in good states of health with good breathing, they have light breathing.